The comms went dark 3 months ago. They sent us in with a checklist and a packet of condolences. What we found wasn't a pile of bodies or a neat disaster log. It was a town that had learned to survive by lying to satellites, stealing power, and making deals with men who answered to no flag. When you break the rules to live, the rescue ship becomes the judge you never ask for. You learn to read silence when you do my job. Space makes a noise of its own, the hum through bulkheads, the faint tick of pumps, but nothing prepares you for the way an entire settlement's absence of signal sounds. It is a flat, empty space on a waveform where human voices should be. It is a missing heartbeat. That was how Port Mercy looked on the dispatcher's screen, a clean hole where chatter used to be. We were the rescue. We were also the unknowable consequence of whatever they had done to stay alive. We dropped through atmosphere in a frame of heat and static, like a bird with an engine on fire. The descent cam fed us an empty harbor, docks skeletal and belted by tarps. The main antenna, the town's mouth to the world, hung at a lopsided angle, half buried in regolith. The comms team ran a sweep while I read the initial distress tags: power anomalies, harvest irregularities, protocol breaches. The list read like a bureaucrat's nightmare. None of it explained the smell that hit us when the airlock cracked. Earth, oddly sweet under dust, and human cooking spiced into something like prayer. We walked into a town that had learned to keep secrets in plain sight. Streets were scoured, not abandoned. Clothes hung on lines between modules, the textile fluttering despite the thin air, like flags of a country no one acknowledged. The hydroponic domes were patched with duct tape and fishing line. Jerry-rigged vent fans hummed, fed by generators chained to engines and a tangle of cables that snaked under cobbles and into basements. Chicken coops, plastic barrels perforated and lit with LED grow lamps, clucked with a stubborn life. Kids darted between shadows, eyes bright, playing a game that involved hiding from the uniformed faces we wore. "Rescue team," I said, badge out like it would mean anything here. A woman with a braid like braided rope met us at the square. Her face had a map of small victories carved into it, a healed scar, a laugh with a missing tooth. "Name?" she asked. "Rourke," I said, it like it was a civility we both understood. She looked at our suits, then at the sky where the old comm dish pointed like an accusation. "You're too clean," she said, which was not a greeting and not a threat. She led us to the supply room, a former municipal archive turned into a council chamber, and introduced us to the self-appointed caretakers. They did not wait for a formal authority to arrive. They were the ones who had decided the rules were suggestions and survival was a law they could not afford to ignore. The story unspooled in fits and starts. 6 months of failed shipments on the trade lanes, a frost that killed half the clones of wheat they'd been promised, a corporate contractor who reneged on repair parts after a strike, a convoy that never came. People had a choice then: stay and watch children starve while permits and red tape argued for a future, or take the means of survival and weld them into a present. They chose the present. How? I asked, because that is the technical part of my brain, the part trained to map systems and failures. The woman, Mara, a leader by bluntness and breakfast duty, showed us the grid. A scavenged reactor core, rerouted with illegal coils taken from discarded mining rigs. Hydrophilic membranes jerry-rigged from tanker linings. A fuel line that siphoned off from the old transit rails at night. None of it was sanctioned. Half of it would earn a colony a dozen fines and a revocation of trade credit in the polite forums of orbital governance. Here, it earned bread. There is a specific sound to moral complexity when it is voiced in a supply room. It is not thunderous. It is people talking under a single light, hands folded around warm mugs, voices precise with fatigue. They told us of the deals, black market technicians who rewired sensors for a share of the harvest, a pilot who ran contraband seeds in a freighter's belly, a medic who diverted pharmaceuticals from a nearby research outpost in exchange for spare parts. No one liked what had to be done. Everyone agreed it had to be done. Survival means a kind of arithmetic that governance sometimes refuses to balance. A younger man, Ezra, had joined their stories with a different kind of urgency. He'd been the official comms officer until the satellite died. Then he'd become the town's archivist and its liar. He had learned how to fiddle signal blips to make the world think Port Mercy was a calm, functioning node while they harvested beneath the radar. "We didn't stop the world from knowing," he told me in the low light. "We made it believe we were only late. If anyone had known the voice in the feed was patched, they would have closed the line." There are many ways to be a criminal. Some wear knives, some wear spreadsheets. Ezra had learned petty treason in a language of sequences and pings. He admitted to it, and in his admission there was no bravado, only the weary arithmetic of someone who had decided which children would sleep full. When I looked at the ledger he kept, lines of numbers, donor IDs crossed against rationed portions, I saw the hand of someone choosing between two impossible ethics. The moral question arrived when we took the generator in the night. They had to. The convoy that might have delivered a battery bank had been waylaid by pirates 2 jumps over. The corporate insurer delayed paperwork for another month. If they tried to requisition the bank politely, it would be requisitioned in bureaucracy for months. The children needed heat tonight, so they walked out in a band and lifted the bank from a sealed maintenance depot, not with guns, but with lockpicks and sleep-deprived hands. They left a note with a string of apology and the names of the kids who would eat tomorrow. The note read like a confession and a prayer. "You realize this looks like theft," I said. Mara's eyes were dry, and leaving it there looks like murder. The line between theft and living sometimes disappears when you remove warm air from a child's cot, and it is the kind of thing policy manuals do not cover. Our mandate was to secure the site and document breaches for higher authority. That phrase, higher authority, already had the weight of absence in it, like a promise to be loaded and never used. My training shoved a folder at me, forms to fill, chain of custody protocols to enforce, recommendations to submit. The bureaucracy smelled like antiseptic and safe margins. Here, in the supply room, the margins would starve. We walked the streets with the caretakers, and the town's quiet made its own case for mercy. A hydroponic rack they'd cobbled from teethless motors fed a cluster of infants in a back room. A generator hummed under a tarp where an old priest ran a clinic. Teenagers taught each other to splice wires like poets teaching verbs. They had become a community of menders. Laws oppose communities, sometimes out of principle, often out of convenience. Once you have scanned a situation in both a legal ledger and with the smell of human stew in your mouth, the choices form like constellations. One set of stars points to report and let governance mete out justice at the cost of this particular present. The other points to cover and care, feed the children, and let the ledger argue in empty rooms. I stood in the middle of both maps and felt the tug the way a bone feels a tendon pull. We found artifacts of desperation that night that made the ledger weep and the chest tighten. A tablet in a child's pocket, stolen instruction manuals for recycling units, a set of forged release signatures on a manifest, a map with routes to a nearby salvage field labeled with the names of the week. That map had been used to retrieve a derelict heat exchanger, an act that saved winter. It also meant that somewhere a regulator would cross a threshold and mark Port Mercy as rogue. I filed the initial report the way a good soldier files, precise, unemotional.
a tidy stack of facts that would make auditors nod. Then I set it down and made coffee for Mara and Ezra. The forms don't tell you to do that. The job's manual assumes a distance it does not require. In the quiet of their kitchen, over burned coffee and a fraction of bread, Mara told me something that split the neat categories the way a knife splits a loaf. When your suits came through the gate, we thought we were saved or judged. Both are heavy. We are tired of sitting on the edge of having to explain our choices to people who have never had to make them. I thought of the board back at Mission Control, men and women making decisions from templates and heat maps.
I thought of the lawyers who would write a report that would be quoted in hearings and then fade into policy. But policy is an echo chamber of good intentions, and intentions don't feed lungs. You can make a law that looks virtuous on paper, while someone inside its neat margins freezes at night. We spent the night walking a neutral line. The caretakers and I drew up a plan that both protected their right to exist and met our mandate to document violations. We would tag and photograph, catalog and inventory, but we would also nominate their repairs into an emergency aid package and expedite the paperwork in ways that would make the auditors unhappy and the children warm. It was not grand, it was the daily arithmetic of mercy. I signed forms with one hand while writing letters of recommendation and emergency requisitions with the other. In the morning, the convoy that would have brought the battery bank found its route cleared by a fortuitous weather window. Maybe luck, maybe the kindness of someone higher up who read the first night's report and decided silence wasn't always righteous. The maintenance depot returned some of its equipment, enough to abate a crisis, but not enough to absolve the ledger. The men in suits would still come. Governance arrives in its own time and its own procession. But I had done what I could to soften the landing. We left Port Mercy with a stack of signed forms, a cache of supplies, a list of named breaches, and a head full of moral arithmetic. My report will live in a drawer and then in a server, and someday someone will summarize it in a panel discussion about policy. They will quote statistics, they will not taste the stew. I hope, in an impossible way, that the handwriting of the children in their folded drawings changes a few hearts when the budget lines are read aloud. If you ask me whether they had the right to steal power, to reroute signals, to buy contraband seeds and feed them to children born on a fringe planet, I tell you this: rules protect civilization, and civilization is a bargain, but bargains fray where hunger begins. We are taught to hold both the rulebook and the human hand, and sometimes that means using the rulebook as a blunt instrument, and sometimes it means letting mercy be the temporary law. As the Argosy rose and Port Mercy shrank under us, the hydroponic lights winked like little defiant stars. Ezra stood at the edge of the main dock, a packet of burned signatures in his hand. He waved, and I waved back, feeling the small, honest tug of something that mattered. We do our work by forms and by conscience. Sometimes they line up, sometimes they don't. In Port Mercy, for now, they had learned to live between the two. I couldn't say whether history would call them heroes or felons. I only knew what the weight on my tongue tasted like, the steady, complicated spice of a human meal eaten in a cold place and shared before judgment.